Hi everyone, I'm Susan Birch and welcome to another episode of the Health Detective podcast. And today I have as my guest the beautiful, lovely Amy Armstrong from Amy Armstrong Health. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with her, sharing her health story and, the family health story. And how she's progressed. She's trained with Morley Robbins and the RCP. She's researched into mineral metabolism. She's a tiny habits coach and a lady of very many talents. So Amy, thanks for coming along.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you so much for having me. I feel quite blessed and honoured to be able to share our story with your audience.
Yeah. Well, let's get started. Where would you like to start with your story?
I guess at the beginning. So my story today is really one to share. I guess it's a family story, but it's really centered around our eldest daughter, who does not want me to share her name today, which is fine, but she did say to me that I was able to share details about her story if it would help someone. She said that she was happy for me to share as long as it would help someone else. And I said, I think in front of the right ears, it could be very kind of inspiring for families who are on a similar journey to what we were on for so many years. With her health. It's going to be hard not to say her name with our daughter's health. So I guess, do you just want me to share?
But I just want to say, would you please thank her on my behalf and all the listeners' behalf for giving you permission to do that, because these stories are really important, and the journey that you've had could really help another family, another young lady. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I guess for those, wondering what her journey entails, before I share the details of that, I suppose it would be helpful, and it might perk up some ears to share, her various diagnoses first, just so, if people are listening, they might find some relevance in the diagnosis. We never really took on board any of the diagnosis, but they were there and they were offered various points along our journey. So I guess, severe general anxiety disorder was probably the first thing that was put on paper for us, followed by, ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, ADHD. At some point, we moved through the process of diagnosing ASD as well, and really ending upon diagnosis of PANS Panda, for those who don't know what they stand for. So PANS is Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, and PANDAS is Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder associated with a strep infection. So there was those two right towards the end of our journey of seeking help in the medical field, along with mast cell activation syndrome as well. So they were kind of the final ones before we parted ways with the medical system, really. So I guess it started for our daughter when she was about 5 years old. Previous to that, I guess in hindsight, there were a lot of signs from birth and even from pre-birth, and now knowing what I know about mineral metabolism and the way that is, generationally passed down, our mineral balance, and, there is a genetic component as well there. So, I guess now in hindsight, I recognise those signs very, very early on, towards the end of my pregnancy, but also in early in her life. However, at the time, we didn't really understand or really know what was going on with her when it began, which was at about 5 years old. So when she was 5, she began school, and I like to think of that as really probably the straw that broke the camel's back. So that's when the symptoms began. They came swiftly. So February of about 2014, she began school and decided within a couple of weeks that she didn't like school. Even though she was quite academic, she was quite a social child, loved kinder, loved daycare and those sorts of things. So she began getting very agitated, and her behaviour just started to turn. So even though it came on very abruptly, it also progressed quite quickly. So she was agitated a lot of the time. She began to have tantrums, which just progressively got longer, progressively got more aggressive and more violent. So by the time we came to about June 2014, she was having violent and aggressive behaviours, tantrums, we were calling them at the time. I know now in pandas terms, a lot of families will be familiar with the term flare. So perhaps she was flaring, although it didn't seem to have any sort of cyclical nature at that point. But her tantrums would go for sometimes 5, 6 or 7 straight hours. Now, how she was able to sustain that length of time is beyond me. So they were very, very long. She was very aggressive towards me and her sisters, and quite violent. She would often, tear up the house. Her violence was very much towards myself and my husband. So we were very alarmed by that stage, and we knew that this fell outside of the realm of what was considered normal for her child her age. So we started to take some videos. She wasn't displaying any of these behaviours at school. And I know for a lot of families in this space, in this pandas world, there is certainly, can be a significant time where the child is acting perfectly well at school, and then they come home and these behaviours begin. So we were there for a number of years. So it was hard to get across the severity of her behaviour to people outside of our home, even family members, because they weren't witnessing it. So by about June, we had sought some medical help. We'd been to the GP, and we were going through the stages of getting a psychiatrist involved, which wasn't an easy task where we live to get help in that respect. She was very violent and aggressive a lot of the time by that stage. So when we first saw the psychiatrist, we showed him the videos, and he suggested that she had had a psychotic break. And my first thought there was, how does a 5-year-old have a psychotic break? It didn't compute for us. She was having visual and auditory hallucinations. She would do very odd things. She was certainly an insomniac. She wasn't sleeping much at all at that stage. She had a lot of, tactile issues. She couldn't have things touching her skin. So we pursued help at that point, and really we were just then in a system that didn't know what to do with her, and she didn't tick enough boxes of anything at that stage to be diagnosable. So of course, we were desperate at that point. She was a danger to herself and to others. So we were presented with the option of an antipsychotic, which at that point we took. It was not something that sat well with me at all. My intuition was screaming that it wasn't the right thing to do, but I guess our justification was safety for her and safety for others at that time. So I guess to jump forward a little bit, we had a lot of testing through that period. We had a brain MRI, which came back normal. We had an EEG. She started to develop other symptoms. She had persistent headaches, stomach aches. She had rashes on her skin. So through that time, we saw various psychologists and psychiatrists. And I think I was telling you off camera before that we were fired by at least 2 psychiatrists and a psychologist who, once our daughter had torn up their office, just basically threw their hands up in the air and said, we don't know how to help you, up her medication, and perhaps consider an antidepressant as well. So we were just working our way through the, conventional medical options at that point, lots of blood tests, and various things. I can't recall them all now. It was such a stressful time. I think I probably blocked a lot of it out. My memory isn't great, and I've been reading back through some notes that I made at the time, even to be able to tell you what I can now. It's like reading somebody else's story, what we went through. So I guess at some point in there, we came to the realization that we weren't getting the help that we needed in the medical system. They weren't offering us a lot of solutions. They were offering us medication that came with side effects. I was very aware, we'd already started to change the way that we were living and eating at that point. I had an interest in health, and I was very aware of the impacts of these medications on a growing brain. As much as they were painted as the only option at that point. And at one point in time, I do recall a practitioner saying to me, basically, her long-term prognosis looked like, psychiatric ward. This is what we're told of our young daughter, who's, we still don't know what's wrong with her. So things did get worse. Her behaviours did start to come out at school, and she started to develop really severe separation anxiety. So it was very, very hard to get her to school. It was hard to get her to stay at school. It was hard to get her to stay in the classroom. She needed full-time help in the classroom. She wasn't in the classroom very often. At some point anyway, she was put onto a personalised learning plan. Her violent and aggressive behaviour hadn't come out at that point at school, but her anxiety had, and it was really severe while she was there. If we could get her there, if I could actually peel her off me, which I know is such a common thing for some parents to go through, that anxiety with their kids. So we started to turn towards more natural solutions. We put a foot in the door of that world at some point and started to consult with naturopaths and nutritionists. We went through a few of those as well. So, we began supplementation with her of various synthetic supplements, which, I didn't really feel in my heart were the solution either. A lot of them had to be topical because, of course, she used to think that we were trying to poison her, so we couldn't get anything in her orally at that point. So a lot of it consisted of me sneaking in the middle of the night and rubbing things on her skin for quite a long time. We tried to remove the risperidone because I just wasn't happy with her being on it, and that went really badly for us. For her, her violent and aggressive behaviour returned, and she probably did step it up a little bit in terms of what she was starting to get a little bit bigger by now, about 8-9 years old, starting to get a little bit stronger. Very aware of protecting her younger siblings as well. We made the decision to put her back on that. Once we embarked on that natural journey, I guess we started to look at things like copper toxicity and heavy metal toxicity and, pyrrole disorder. We started to explore parasites. So we did get her, we did explore parasites, and she came back testing positive for D. fragilis and blasto, which we all did. So we, again, a foot in both worlds really, because we embarked on a long course of antibiotics for the whole family to clear her of the D. fragilis and the blasto. And ironically, that was successful for all of us apart from her. So on retesting, she still had, further testing revealed she still had those parasites. So we continued on some herbal treatment in that area as well. Things still weren't getting better. By about 2000 and I'm not really even sure, 2015, 2016, she was really not attending school a lot. There was probably 3 to 6 months where she didn't attend school at all. She had been violent towards people at school at that point, to staff. The whole fight and flight. If she was cornered and she couldn't flee and climb the fence and run on the road, she would fight. So that was added another element of stress for her and for us as well. By about 2016, we were really taking a foot out of the medical world and really placing our hopes in natural medicine. Although a nutritionist we were consulting with at the time had said to us that she wanted to consult with a toxologist, is that the right word? Toxologist, and consider some heavy metal chelation, some medical grade heavy metal chelation. I really balked at that. It came with a lot of risks, and I still wasn't convinced that heavy metals were the issue. For me at that stage, I'd really started to do my own research. We'd been there for a lot of years now, and I was in the weeds of it. I was researching a lot of hours a day, still trying to find mainly practitioners to save us, which I think, I was very much still in that place where I thought somebody needed to save us, not realizing that we had the ability to possibly do that on our own at that point. So we pulled back from the heavy metal chelation, said no to that. And, we'd had some genetic testing done as well. We knew she had SNPs and various MTFHR things going on. So we really just pulled back on all of it at that point to reassess what we were going to do. At that point, she started to have suicidal thoughts. And talked a lot of, she was old enough to be aware of what was happening to her. Sorry, it's a little bit emotional to talk about that. And it was very hard for her to be alive at that point. So that sort of reinvigorated us to keep seeking help. And we eventually found an integrative psychiatrist in Melbourne who I don't think they can call themselves that here. But she was a child psychiatrist, and she was, I found her doing a lot of research into psychiatrists that didn't just want to medicate children and send them on their merry way. And we came up with her. So we went and met with her, and we started to consult with her and talk about medicinal cannabis as an option as well. I should back up and just say at some point in there, we were convinced by a doctor to start her on an antidepressant as well. So at this point, she's on the antipsychotic. She's also on Zoloft, which if I could have my time again, I would never, ever have embarked down that path. Right towards our parting of ways with conventional medicine, she was on a significant amount of Zoloft because it wasn't working. So, just keep upping it. So had I realized the taper that was involved to get off of that Zoloft, I would never have gone there. But we did that taper over the course of a year under the help of the integrative psychiatrist, and she was really great. So we tapered off that slowly. whilst introducing the cannabis as well, which was quite the process to get that as well. And for anyone who tried it, you will know it's it's very expensive. It wasn't helping a great deal, unfortunately for us. We were almost pinning our hopes on that at that stage. Which brings us kind of to the root cause protocol. And at some point in there, about 2017, I was researching. For me, the question was always, what's under that? What's under that? It's her hormones. Well, why? I kept asking why? What is at the foundation of this? What is happening? What is the first thing that is going pear-shaped in this little body? At that stage, we really believed that her brain was very inflamed, but we didn't know why. So I started to dig deeper, I suppose, and I came across minerals. I came across magnesium, which sounded like something would be very helpful for her at the time. And some kind stranger on Facebook at some point said to me, why don't you check out Morley Robbins and the magnesium advocacy group, which in those days was quite small. It wasn't the root cause protocol that we know and see today in such an organised fashion, but he was consulting with people. So I started to research minerals. I started to, at this point, I think I just taught myself how to read research articles, how to understand the lingo, how to understand what was a good article and what was a good research paper and what wasn't. I was, it was an education, a forced education. So I guess the thoughts started to change to, nobody's going to save us. Nobody's going to save her. We have to save her. We have to do this. So, it was really, there wasn't a defining moment, but I do remember my thoughts of being, I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to, and on my own, I guess, I've obviously employed help. Early on, it was Morley, but, different people along the way, but I had the reins. And so we consulted with Morley in, I think, early 2017. And he explained all the dynamics to us. I have to admit, I at that point thought that it would be helpful, but I wasn't sure it would be the answer. Sitting alongside of this is my health that was going severely south this whole time for very obvious reasons. The stress of the way life was for all of us. So I embarked. I thought I'd stick a toe in first and do the protocol, and I had a consultation with Morley as well. So we consulted Morley and we began the root cause protocol. And we almost immediately started to see some difference. And that was quite incredible. For her, it was, she was not curled up in a ball so much, sucking her thumb, which was, very much from the minute she got home to the minute she went to bed was the position that she would be in, would be fetal with the thumb in her mouth. Because a lot of the time she was very zombie-like. She wasn't there. She wasn't our child. She wasn't present. She was just a shell of a person. So we saw her being in that position less, which was a really big deal for us, and just a little bit more energy. And at the same time, I was, paralleling that with my own increase in energy. I had iron deficiency anemia at that point and was very dysregulated myself and not in a good way with my own health. So I started to see an increase in my energy as well, which was fabulous. Stop me if I'm going on too long. I'm nearly at the end.
No, you're doing a fantastic job, and it is so incredibly emotional listening to this. I keep blinking back tears.
Yeah, it's
even imagine what it must have been like for your family, for your husband, for your relationship, for your other children, and just I don't know what to say, but just, well done, all of you, really.
Yeah, I think, as I said to you before, I think we've been very lucky in our outcome, which I'll get to in a minute. But it also changed the trajectory of my life and my career and my passion. And I thank her for that. And I think for me, it saved me. It gave me purpose, and then this real passion and drive just to help other people, and hopefully share this story to inspire some hope, in families that are going through the same thing as what we did. But yeah, we started the root cause protocol. We did see some improvements initially. And then she took a turn for the worse, and she actually got a whole lot worse in terms of her behaviour, in terms of her aggressive and violent outbreaks, and what she was capable of, given that she was getting a little bit older and a little bit stronger again, and the lengths that she was willing to go to. We were at that point putting away all the knives and the scissors. I was very much on, fight or flight 24/7, because you didn't know when she was going to get up in the middle of the night. She had two younger sisters, one which was almost from a very, very young age. She was a baby when this started. So, she came into this world experiencing trauma, which is really hard to even admit that to myself now. Like, I find that that's hard to talk about, the impact on the siblings, and on myself and my husband, and our relationship as well. She would do things like try and jump out of a moving car at 100 kilometers an hour, and if I was in the car on my own, with her sisters in the back, she would attack me while I was driving, to the point where I couldn't drive, and we would be stuck on the side of the road in a car with a 10-year-old with psychotic tendencies, and her trying to hurt herself and her sisters and me. So that they're just little glimpses into our daily life, I guess. So very much had a wider impact on all of us, on the family and on our extended family. My parents are very present in our lives as well, and often I'd have to send the other two to their house, just for protection, just to keep them safe. There were times where we would call the ambulance or the police. We just didn't know what to do. It was just hard, and there was no end to it, and it was every day. And the RCP was helping a little bit, but not a great deal. So I guess there's a couple of years in there where things got worse for her and for us. But you know what? We just stayed the course. I'd done enough research, and I was still researching on a daily basis. But I was very much in the zone of, this is nobody cares as much about what happens with her as we do, and it has to be us. And so, I was still just researching a lot. I was starting to understand the mineral dynamics that were possibly going on in her body. We'd had, hair analysis done. We'd had lots of blood work. I was tracking that. I was speaking to people online, all day, every day, trying to find. There wasn't PANS and PANDAS groups around there that I was aware of. That's very much been in the last few years that started to build as something that's had public awareness and had conventional backing as even a diagnosis of a real disease disorder. So, that support wasn't there. I was always reaching out, looking for I couldn't find anyone who was going what we were going through anywhere. So that was really hard as well. We felt very isolated. Nobody understood what we were going through. We stuck the course because I just believed in my heart that that, you know, the mineral balancing was going to be effective. To the point that it was, I didn't know, but I knew that it was going to be helpful for her, given what an inflamed state that she was in. And so I was really starting to think autoimmune at this stage, even aside from the PANS and PANDAS diagnosis, which came right at the end of our journey. So we stayed the course with the protocol. We weren't seeing a lot from it in those few years, a little bit more energy and things like that. Maybe there was subtle signs that I wasn't aware of, but nevertheless, we stuck the course with the protocol, implementing every phase that we could, however best we could, you know, given that it was a child. And we were referred on to a integrative practitioner from the psychiatrist in Melbourne, and because the psychiatrist has said to us, I really think there's a mast cell activation component here. You know, this little girl's immune system is just on high alert all of the time. And that made sense to me. And she said, I think we'd done some strep testing. There wasn't any evidence of that, but we thought PANS may be, you know, a possible diagnosis as well. So we went to see that integrative practitioner who just based, you know, just clinically was able to say, I think that those are the things that are going on for her. So again, she turned us towards some synthetic supplements. We declined and said we're going to do this with whole food supplementation. That was our, so we were happy to add some things, but we were going to stick with the root cause protocol in its entirety. From there, we basically added quercetin.
Right.
A lot of quercetin, because the alternative was antihistamines.
Yeah. And that was supplemental quercetin.
Yeah. So she was taking a lot of quercetin, and I also made the call to significantly increase her cod liver oil based on my knowledge at the time.
Yeah.
So those are the two things we were doing when things just started to change. So obviously there's a lot of foundational work under that, and I'm not suggesting that someone go and take quercetin and cod liver oil and everything will be great, but that was the turning point. And from there, she just got better and better and better. And I just want to snap forward just to end the story, I guess. In 2021, she started secondary school, which we were really worried about. She'd been doing quite well for about 12 months at that point, maybe not even 12 months. A bit shaky, but, you know, real improvements, almost in that realm of what you would consider normal behaviour. So, yeah, she began secondary school, and having struggled through her whole entire primary years, struggled socially, emotionally, mentally, never really academically, even though she'd missed a lot of school, but she struggled in every way. She just flourished. She just came into herself. So of course, then the next real worry was when she started to menstruate, when she started to cycle, when she started to grow and her hormones began to change. That was another real point for me where I was a little bit white-knuckled and thinking, oh God, is it all going to, you know, tumble down again? But by the grace of God, she has just sailed through all of it. And I mean, I would consider her, sometimes I think she's one of the least anxious out of her peers. She has a real empathy for people. She has a real understanding of where she has come from. She understands what she's been through. She understands what we have been through. She's grateful for the journey. She will often thank me for everything that we've done. She's, yes, she's a teenager in every sense of the word, but she's an absolute pleasure to have. And she is, you know, high functioning in every sense of the word. And academically, she's, you know, flourishing, absolutely flourishing as well, which we didn't ever put, there was never any, we didn't care about that. We didn't care about that one bit, because we just wanted a child that could function in society. And we have that, plus more. She's a delightful kid. And, I think the RCP was the turning point for her. And ultimately, yes, there's probably elements of other things that we did along the way that helped. But, as the foundational piece, I have to attribute her health to the RCP.
And to a very tenacious, determined, intelligent, capable, loving mum as well.
Thank you. The old adage, it does take a tribe, and I couldn't have done what I did without the support of my husband, who, he very much let me take the reins in the aspects of her health, and trusted. He trusted me, and he trusted what I said. And when I said no to doctors, or when I said it's time for us to move on, or we need to stop doing this, or we're going to try this, he just put his trust in what I said, because I guess he saw how much time I spent, and still do to this day, with my, head in a book or on a podcast or reading research, or, anything that I can to increase my knowledge around what's going to keep her there now.
Well, it's, it's incredibly hard to even know what to say. But there are a few points that you raised in there that I think would be very interesting for people if we go back a little bit and talk about them. But before that, I'm just curious, at a few times during, your recollections, I was wondering, how did teachers, how did other parents, were you just a bad parent? Did you need to be stricter, or did you need to have more discipline, or did she just need to learn to be, more responsible? I mean, what was that part of the journey like?
Yeah, look, I have to say, our community, we live in a small community. Our community was very supportive, our school community. They were great. I cannot fault the school in how they supported us through that time. What was being said, when I wasn't there, I'm not sure. I think we kept it very well hidden from a lot of people. In fact, I think if people listen to this who are in our lives now, they might be really surprised to learn about her journey. They may not know that that's what we had been through. So, we tried to keep it quite private. But there was also an element which I know a lot of Pandas families share, just because I see it in the Facebook groups, in the parents who are, in there, letting off steam and looking for support, that people just don't, they don't believe it. They think you're exaggerating, or they write it off, or, it's just bad behavior. Because as much as, and that was the other part, I mean, I probably didn't really talk about that part of it, but, there were times where, and this sounds this is really hard to say now, where I wished, and I used to say to my husband, I wish she had cancer. I wish she had something that people could see. They don't understand. People would feel for us if they thought she had cancer. And I mean, that, I know that sounds terrible to say, and I don't wish that on anybody. But because it's mental illness, it's considered mental illness. And I never, ever thought of it as mental illness. I always knew that it was her body. It's, it doesn't happen above the shoulders. Anything that's happening above the shoulders, there is, your body is sick, And so I never viewed it as a mental illness, but to everybody else it was mental illness. And there is a stigma there is, and and it's particularly hard and awkward for people to talk about when it comes to kids and mental illness.
And well, it's so hard to know what to say. It's so hard. You don't know how to offer any help and assistance. I mean, all you can do really is just be there to support families, and maybe in those situations, with your other two children, is giving them a break as well, taking them away and making sure that they're having some fun times in their lives, and which it sounds like your mum and dad did really well for you.
Yeah.
I can imagine, the situation that many families are in, and just trying to think of, things that their friends and family can do to support them.
Yeah. I think lending an ear, particularly for,
mums and dads,
the adults. And there was times where people would take the kids, for us, which aside from my parents, which was really helpful, and let them, like you say, let them have some fun times. People would sometimes drop around, and there was a good period of time where I was unable to leave the house. I was housebound, so I wasn't working at the time. I couldn't go to work. People would bring meals and things like that, which is just, those things stick with you, those little things that people do in way of support. Like, somebody bought me a cake and a meal one day, and I just, I remember just staying there crying, holding this cake and this meal, because at that point, I don't think I had cooked anything for days, because I was quite depressed and anxious as well. So that was just a lifesaver on that day. Yeah, it's definitely the little things.
Well, all I can say is well done to all of you as a family for holding it together and getting through this. I can't imagine actually how challenging that must have been.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing, Sue, that I'd just like to say, I guess, is for parents caring for a child who's suffering from, any sort of chronic disease, and you're in this incredibly dark time where, you're experiencing so much helplessness and hopelessness, and you want nothing more than someone to tell you that it'll be okay. Yeah, gosh, I see you. Like, we were there, and all you want is a normal life for your child, and they're suffering, in immeasurable ways, physically and emotionally and mentally, and everyone around them is suffering as well. Yeah, there is hope. There is always hope. You have to keep searching. You have to keep researching. You have to keep inquiring, and don't ever settle for anything that goes against your intuition. Don't ever be railroaded into a line of treatment that doesn't sit with you. There is always more than one option, always.
Fantastic. And at this point, I'm just going to say, for anyone listening who would like to get in touch with Amy, we will make sure we put all your contact details in the show notes, Amy, because I know you're there to help people and coach people through this and provide that support. And you can do it in a very unique way because of your own experiences.
Yeah, yep, it's definitely my mission and my passion now is just to help as many people, on their journeys as I can.
Right. So now I'd like to just talk a little bit about minerals, because right in the beginning of this conversation, you were talking about, pregnancy, your daughter's early life, and how, knowing what you know now, it would have been obvious that her minerals would have been imbalanced. So can we talk a little bit about that? Can we talk about stress, the role that stress and trauma play in our mineral balance, our HPA axis, that whole adrenal system? You mentioned magnesium and the importance of magnesium, and then also you talked about being copper toxic, and then you talked about being anemic and iron deficiency anemia. So can we just touch on some of those things and some of the misunderstandings about those processes?
Yeah, I think a good place to start there, Sue, is, and I know with a lot of clients that I work with, they don't really understand that there's this generational aspect to their minerals, which is stress related as well. So, I guess from my perspective, when I say what I know now, I would have been able to, there would have been some red flags going up, is I guess the health of my mother and her mother before that was not necessarily very good either. And what we know through Morley's teachings as well is, there's a massive download of copper that happens in the third trimester. And then, that copper is activated by the retinol in your breast milk. So there's that element of breastfeeding too. But if your mother or her mother before her didn't, have a full complement of minerals to give to your mother or then to you, you don't get it either. And that's that, I guess that's really overlooked as something that's, it does not to make people into victims of the circumstances of their birth or their parents before them, but it does give you an understanding of, you could have come out behind the 8 ball, so to speak, to begin with when it comes to your minerals. So looking back to my own childhood now and all the way through, I can see I was very dysregulated, since childhood. I had asthma, I had bad allergies, all those childhood types of symptoms, and a lot of other things as well. And I think, so my health going into my pregnancy wasn't great. I didn't value my health at that point. I spent theme park, traveling the world and doing all the associated activities with that. And, I really was quite dysregulated leading into my pregnancy as well. There's a lot of generational stress there on both sides of my mother and my father's side. So that generational stress, whether you believe it or not, is in your cells, it sets the stage for dysregulation, I think, before we're even a twinkle in our mum's eye. So, there's that element. Then very late in pregnancy, we decided to build a house. Don't build a house while you're pregnant. So that, along with, I think, I don't know how many weeks, maybe when I was about 32 weeks pregnant, they told us that our daughter's brain had stopped growing. So, of course, the amount of stress that I had in late pregnancy, thinking there was something wrong with my child's brain, that stress, I have no doubt impacted her. And then when she came out, she showed clear signs of dysregulation, as did I. I had very bad postnatal depression. Mm-hmm. She was a very unsettled baby. She would not feed from me. She would not feed from a bottle. We were giving her Zantac, an antacid at the time, because she was apparently silently refluxy. All these little things. She was clearly dysregulated upon entering the world. She had a very strong startle reflex. She always looked like she was, startled. So I guess for me, when I start to, and there's probably more than I can't think of either, but there was definitely pieces early on that, I put together now. And I think, why didn't someone sit me down and tell me to take care of my body for a good year before I conceived? And why didn't someone tell me I'd be so minerally deplete upon birth? And my postnatal depression wasn't all in my head and me being depressed about, being a mother and having a child that wouldn't feed. It was actually, I was just severely dysregulated severely minerally dysregulated, and so was my offspring. So I think that's a huge overlooked part.
Do you think, did the other girls show signs of mineral dysregulation?
Certainly. So we had our children quite close together, which again, knowing what I know now, is, not the best idea from that health aspect. It probably takes your body 3 or 4 years to replete before you go into another pregnancy. So our first 2 were 18 months apart. Not so much the second one, but the third one, certainly she had very severe bronchiolitis and asthma as a baby and young child. So again, knowing what I know now, I rather than steroids upon steroids upon steroids and all the other things that she had, and hospital stays and things like that, we could have tackled that very differently, and we did. And that might be a good time to say that we did have 3 asthmatics in the house, 1 very severe asthmatic, which was my youngest child. We have no asthma anymore. We don't even keep a Ventolin in the house. So, it's, that's a testament to, the things that the protocol and things we've done with minerals along the way.
Because one of the other things about mineral dysregulation during pregnancy is often, if you're not really consciously managing your minerals, and I like what you said about let's try and do it with real food as much as we can. Each subsequent pregnancy can lead to greater dysregulation.
And it definitely did for I guess my last child, but for me, my health got worse and worse and worse with every pregnancy. Absolutely. I had a lot more issues with my health after I had my 3rd child.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about iron and copper and magnesium and, things like cod liver oil and maybe real food, vitamin C, as opposed to ascorbic acid, and other things like maybe avoiding supplemental vitamin D and supplemental zinc.
Yeah. So interestingly, just starting with the zinc, I guess, zinc's one of those still gets a lot of media attention, particularly in the last few years. And it's something that if you ask the average person on the street about zinc, they can probably tell you, it's good for your immunity along with vitamin C. People seem to generally know that to be a thing. What they don't know is that when you supplement zinc, you're very much throwing out your copper balance by doing that. And I think zinc, zinc again may not be in your blood. It doesn't mean it's not in your body. It can be sitting in your liver under stress. And interestingly, what I was going to say for my daughter is her zinc was very low, very, very low. So we did start, not unknowingly start zinc supplementation at some point in time. It never increased. Her zinc in her zinc in her blood never increased. And it was a long time after we stopped doing that, and we were concentrating on retinol from cod liver oil and copper, copper-rich foods, that her zinc actually started to come back into range. So interestingly, it wasn't the zinc that, supplementation that actually did that. I guess the copper, we were told early on too that she was very copper toxic.
So how was it determined? Did they do serum tests, or how did they decide she was copper toxic?
That was based on serum tests and on hair tests. She has had a few hair tests over the years, but of course, our take on a hair test is very different to how some of the practitioners would understand a hair test. And so we were actively working to remove the copper from her body, and her ceruloplasmin was very, very low too. It was like 0.15, 16, 17, floating around there as well. So, hindsight's a wonderful thing. We were not really doing her any favors by trying to remove, focusing on as copper as the bad guy. We should have been focusing on increasing her ceruloplasmin and her bioavailable copper. So, but again, as you would know, being in this field, as you know, the copper toxicity is still a really popular theory, particularly when it comes to mental health.
Yeah. And it's just a theory and doesn't have any real evidence behind it. It's just something. And her iron, and your iron, because you talked about you were, iron.
Anemic. I was diagnosed iron. That was after my third pregnancy, and I was feeling like absolute rubbish. I mean, I couldn't get out of bed in the mornings. My fatigue was about as pretty severe at that point. So I still hadn't, that was just prior to discovering the RCP, so I still really hadn't made that connection. So I was having weekly iron injections, I think. And even at the time, I remember thinking, not knowing any, that is probably was far from ideal. I remember thinking when I was having these injections, can injecting yourself with a heavy metal this often be a good thing? I just remember thinking that every time I'd lay down to get my injection. And so, that sort of set the stage for, I guess, maybe that's why I inquired into that. Anyway, so I was iron deficient, anemic for, or that's what, that's what they diagnose you with for quite a long time. My iron numbers were really low. Still some to this day, and I've seen a lot of clients now, but there's still to this day some of the lowest I've ever seen. I think I've had the lowest ceruloplasmin I've ever seen as well. So, and copper. So really, really low. And the irony is, and I share this often in my social posts, that I started to feel really fabulous a long time before my iron numbers changed, a long time. So I guess that's, a testament to, the protocol, for, the magnesium, the retinol, the copper that I was having at the time. It took a long time for those numbers to move. On paper, I should not have been feeling the way that I was feeling. Given that I had such severe iron anemia.
And I think, for, these minerals are so much part of the equation for proper cellular function, for mitochondria to be able to do their job. If your mitochondria can't work properly and produce energy properly, your cells can't do the jobs they're designed to do, and symptoms start to arise, and then they compound, and life stresses and everything else compounds along with it.
Absolutely. And I think our electrolytes are so undervalued in that conversation too. Still, I think if you ask the average person on the street what our electrolytes do, they would say it's something you drink when you get sweaty or you've done a lot of exercise, whereas dysregulated electrolytes are, the beginning of that whole cascade. And I know for me in my RCP journey, the very first thing that I did was take the adrenal cocktail and mineral drops. And those two things alone got me out of bed. Within about 6 weeks, I had a little bit of energy. And I just thought, how can this be? It's just electrolytes. well, of course, knowing what electrolytes do now, and the role they play in cellular health, it's like, now I understand.
Absolutely. And of course, people are told don't have so much sodium, and nobody's taught about the importance of potassium and magnesium, and the fact that they need to be together in optimal ratios.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that delicate dance is one that people aren't aware of, between your potassium and your sodium and your magnesium and your calcium as well, although we don't seem to focus on that so much supplementally. But, it is a really delicate dance. And I think we learnt the hard way initially with too much magnesium and not really paying attention to the sodium and potassium. So there was a period of time there where I did feel worse and was thinking, oh, magnesium's making me worse, which is a common enough thing to hear as well, that it doesn't work or it actually makes you feel worse. But I think it was Christine from our community may have, highlighted that to me, that I probably need to pay some more attention to my other electrolytes. And magnesium, of course, well, when we started to see signs of our other two kids' health improving and their asthma disappearing, at that stage, that's all we were doing. That's, they were having magnesium orally, and they were having magnesium quite a bit topically. They were having baths, and they were having, creams and oils rubbed on their skin every day. And, that's when the symptoms actually started to disappear, just with the magnesium,
which has got like 3,758 functions in the body or something like that.
That's it. Yeah, like that's a lot of enzymes that it's responsible for. Yeah.
And I was talking to Jim Stevenson Jr. just the other day, Saturday. I think I did a podcast with him on vitamin D and supplemental vitamin D versus natural sources of vitamin D, and he was talking about the role of magnesium and the vitamin D pathways. So it's so vital for everything. But one of the things is that these things all work together. They all work in a balance, and I get quite concerned when I you keep seeing all these ads for take vitamin D and magnesium to protect you against COVID, or, take all this ascorbic acid as a vitamin C, beta carotene instead of retinol.
What do you think the fallout will be from, the amount of marketing and airtime vitamin D and ascorbic acid and zinc have had in the last few years, and how much people will have been taking those supplements?
Well, people will get quite angry at the end of the day as this knowledge and information becomes more widespread. And I must admit, a lot, we were talking beforehand about some of the amazing people who I've interviewed and who are absolute leaders in their field. And yet I see them still out there advertising, take vitamin D, take zinc. And, sometimes, I'll comment on their posts or try and, share something with them, but it's a myth that's just accepted as a truth. And of course, you just Google it, and of course, it's going to come up with all these absolutely amazing things that it helps with. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that supplements are the same as getting it in your real food. And it doesn't mean it's the same as having proper mineral balance between all your minerals and your vitamins, for that matter. I mean, everything works in a coordinated fashion.
Absolutely. I think, the value of the protocol is that it's a whole picture. It's balancing all these minerals, and not, there's various points at which Morley is focused in trying to get the message across about different components, but the overarching message is all of your minerals affect each other in a good and a bad way. And just to stop and think about, you know, if I'm taking this 10,000 IU of vitamin D every day or every week, what could that be doing to my other minerals? Because, you know, retinol, the real vitamin A and vitamin D, they work in a balance. So, and you need them in a balance for, you know, every facet of our working. So what happens when we are taking, and there's no doubt that vitamin D has all these wonderful roles in the body, and we've seen that advertised over the last 2 or 3 years. But you're right in what you're saying. That doesn't mean that taking that synthetic D3 isolated pill is the same as, you know, the real thing and what it's doing in your body. And I think if, you know, people will be able to tune into Jim for that one, for some home truths there. He's a wealth of knowledge around vitamin D and all its different pathways. You know, something he said always stuck with me is that is there like 14 different directions it can go, and we don't get to pick.
No, our body chooses that for us. Yeah. He was very good, and he kept it at quite a nice elevated level. So because, you know, anyone who wants to go deeper can go and listen to his podcasts, and he can get as sciencey as anybody needs, but we kept it at I thought it was a nice level anyway.
Yeah, that's great. And I think there is a, you know, a growing, practitioners speaking about vitamin D in a different light is starting to happen a little bit more. So I guess it's just being aware of every mineral has other minerals that, you know, if you raise it, you're lowering other minerals in your body that are necessary for other pathways. So it's like what's that game? Whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
You know, so we've got to talk about balance, and if you want balance, you know, and you don't necessarily understand how to get it, that's where the root cause protocol comes in, because it's kind of, you know, the nuts and bolts of it are there for you, about what your body requires to be in balance.
And I think, you know, you and I've talked about this before, we have this real focus on weight, you know, and we have a real focus on calories. And, you know, one of my sort of long-term, I suppose, projects, long-term, you know, aspects that I'd like to get across to people is that, you know, we have a nutrient system and we have an energy system, and so our calories are part of the energy system. That's our carbs and our fats and how much of those we need to stay in energy balance. But if we're not focusing on that nutrient system, we can't use those carbs and fats properly anyway, and we're still going to have all these symptoms and this dysregulation. And, you know, we're talking about stress, and we're talking about psychological stress and all these other things, but we have stress from mineral imbalance. We have stress from insufficient nutrients, the stress on our body. So, you know, if we want to lose weight, if we want to have the motivation and the mindset to lose weight, we've got to really focus on the nutrients that we're getting into our body.
Absolutely. And I always like to say to people too, when you think of stress, you know, when you ask the average person how they think of stress, you know, it's emotional and mental. And I like to ask them, do you ever think about stress being in your cells? You know, stress is what's going on. So when we experience stress, that stress stresses our cells, and minerals move in and minerals move out. And so the stress is happening in our cells, and that's kind of a different view on stress, you know, on stress on our body. Like you say, it can be very much internal stress that people need to be managing better. as well as all the other stress.
As well. There is so much, but I think it's really exciting that medicine and research is really heading more down those pathways and really looking at cellular components and how we respond to light and how we respond to different stresses. And, you know, it's such an exciting time to be involved in health and in helping people, you know, feel well so they can live that life that they want to live and have that mindset and motivation to really take care of themselves.
And it's also very simple. I mean, the biochemistry behind it, yeah, there's so much complexity in the body, and we don't even begin to understand how everything really works. But the steps that you need to actually take, the things that you actually need to do to stay in front of your health are really, really simple. And I think that's, you know, since that realization for our family, that's what we just aim to do. I don't overthink it. We just live a really simple life. We eat real food. Yeah. We all prioritize sleep. You know, the children are forced to prioritize sleep a lot of the time, but we all prioritize sleep. We all prioritize movement, and, you know, that's it, really.
And fun, you know, fun.
Yeah, and joy, and doing the things that you love to do. So, you know, it's not all so complicated. So yeah, we've really implemented that in the, you know, the hopes of, after being through what we've been through, I think the more things that we've stripped away over the years, and the more simpler that we've made our lives, I think that's had a huge impact as well. And I can't, you know, for our daughter, in her health and in her mind, I think, yeah, just simplifying everything has been a big piece of the puzzle as well.
Well, Amy, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. I think we started talking at 5 o'clock and it's 7:15 now.
Oh, you too. So well done to anybody who's made it through to the end of this chat.
It's been absolutely incredible talking to you. Please thank your daughter once again for letting you share her story.
Yeah, I will.
It was a very emotional episode, and I hope that people listening, if you know anyone who might need help, please share this with them. This might be a good one to share with your GP if you're really struggling, and, you know, yourself with a child in this way, and, you know, just to get some greater different input into the situation. And Amy, would you tell people where they can find you? Because I know you're out there and you're ready to help when people...
Yeah, yep. So my social handles, so Instagram and Facebook, I am quite active on both of those, just Amy Armstrong Health. Or you can find me at my website, which is www.amyarmstrong.com.au as well. And yes, so yeah, I hope that this gets to the right sets of ears, just to inspire some hope. And just remember, if your child is suffering, you know, from chronic mental type illnesses, you know, maybe it's time to turn the focus inside their bodies, as well as dealing with everything that's happening out here. I think, you know, is it time to reassess what they're eating and how they're living and how much sleep they're getting and how much, you know, blue light they're getting and screen time and all those sorts of things. Don't discount how much difference starting to deal with those things can help as well.
And then I'll just add in there, just remember to take care of your own health. You know, it comes back to putting that mask on the airplane.
Oh, absolutely.
So
yes.
If you're not well, you can't help anybody else. So really focus on your own health, reach out, get support. And yeah, we're both here to, be good listening ears for anyone.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You too, Sue. I think that's become when I do work with children, I think sometimes it's my role speaking to and supporting the mothers that becomes just as important as the other part. So
well, thank you once again, and everybody, please, if you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and like, and make sure you share so we can get this very important message out to the world.
Yeah, thanks, Sue.